All right, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Lydia Schnetta, and today I'm here to speak about beginning switch access in the I am a speech language pathologist assistant, and I am studying to be a TVI. I still very much look at things through a speech background, but I start my internship in the fall, and I've been working at the San Diego County Office of Education and the Assistive Technology Department for the last 13 years or so. So let's see, this way. So I created this module to talk about how iPads can be used to support beginning switch users. It's a fire hose of information. So there are lots of resources that are embedded in the slides. So if you would like to follow along, or just so that for your reference, I've attached, if you go down to the bottom and go to chat, I have a link to the slides that we're looking at, so you can follow along or take your own notes or see my notes. I have my two screens, so if you see me looking over here, I got two things going. Okay, so the overview, we're going to talk about switch access and what is switch scanning. We're going to talk about our iPad scanning options, our hardware setup, so all the things that go into it, and then we're actually going to spend some time talking about pre-scanning switch skills on the iPad. Oh, let me paste them again. I think when you join, you don't get the benefit of the chat that was before. Could be wrong. So I just posted those again. Okay, so scanning. Oops. Scanning is a process where a person or even a screen reader will sequentially present choices or groups of choices to a communicator. I can see already the target, I guess, would be, like looking like down the line. A lot of times with the kind of populations that we work with, we're thinking scanning is the way that we would want them to access their communication. So then the communicator who would signal when the desired item is reached, and they could signal it with a button, or they could signal it with a body movement. So like at a Starbucks, even it could be, you could be looking at a case of things and point at the first row and say, is it in this row? And then look to your partner for a response, and then you could scan down through the rows and then scan through the items. So that's scanning in a nutshell. It is a cognitively challenging concept. And yeah, I already said that. All right. So 3- and 4-year-old children who are typically developing have difficulty learning to scan. They said it takes at least, they had a case study with a 4-year-old with cerebral palsy, and it took her 10 hours of direct instruction. So in 20-minute instructional sessions, she had 30 of those to learn how to scan. And the reason for that is because activating switches sometimes can be hard work. Some of the demands of switch scanning are waiting. So you have to have working memory demands. There's physical movement that you have to coordinate. There's tracking where the focus is at. And you can do this visually or auditorily. Remembering what it was that you were trying to say in the first place, remembering which button does what, and if you give a student one button, they also have timing to deal with. So for this session, we're going to focus on two-switch scanning, which a great deal of kids can do. Even some kids where I'll come in and the teacher's already ruled it out, we've had success. So just something to think about. So on this slide is a meme of Napoleon Dynamite, and he's saying switch scanning is a skill. Check my scan. So that leads to the question, when should we start teaching it? And we all know it's kind of pointless to present a computer before a child's developmentally ready, but it's really difficult to unlearn helplessness once it's learned. And even if the child's just learning some voluntary movements, we can teach initiative and other self-determined behaviors with switches. So even if the child is unsuccessful, what we're saying is that you can participate and we expect you to participate. And we're talking about students with physical impairments who are visual learners and auditory learners. And the other component is that the iPad has to be meaningful for that student. So it has to, and usually for a lot of students it is, you just want it to be something that grabs attention and is worth looking at. So hopefully I'll share some games that will meet that requirement for you. But first we're going to talk about the hardware. I just have a kind of a shopping list of items that we're going to talk about. So an iPad, a mount for the iPad, an interface, switches and mounts for those switches, like the one that I have here, and the apps that you need. Okay. So in this presentation, we're going to talk a lot about external switches. I know the iPad has a touch screen. You can set up the screen to be used as a switch. And the iPad has a front-facing camera that can be used with left and right head movements. But a lot of times, students can't access the screen and look at it. So having the switch external instead of using the screen or the camera can give you the most flexibility, at least initially. So there is an extra piece of equipment that you need in order to do this. And it's called an interface. And that's just a term for how you interact with something. But on this slide, I have a flow chart. And on one end, it has a button or a switch with one of these plugs on the end. I don't remember what these are called. They're like the radio jack thing. I've seen some people just plug it into their iPad and it doesn't work. So, and the reason it doesn't work is because in the middle on this slide is the interface. So this button doesn't mean anything to your iPad, but what does make sense is an interface, which is basically a modified keyboard. In this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different keystrokes that I can assign. And you'll find that a lot of apps respond with the same keyboard strokes. So this is good news because since the interface is basically a modified keyboard, we're not going to use iOS switch control at all for this. So that's the good news. So what we're doing is starting with switch apps that have special settings built in or native apps that respond to different keyboard strokes. And if you have any questions, you can jump in there. So on this slide, I have my top 3 switch interfaces, and they have a few things in common. They're all rechargeable. They all they're all programmable, or in the case of the first one and the last one, they have every keyboard stroke available to you, so you can just assign it to one of those ports. And those are the 2 biggies, actually, I would say. It's just the battery and that. And just the flexibility with the keyboard stroke that you need. 2 of those have a switch built in. So the Bluetooth has a switch on the top, 2 switches. The Praetorian iSwitch has 1 switch. And you can actually, on the Praetorian iSwitch, you can actually pair more than one to your iPad. So if they need 2 switches or 3 switches, or I don't think I've found a limit. I don't think I've had more than 3 switches paired, but you can have more switches paired up, and that'll work. And then I have some considerations on the side. For the iSwitch, the biggest issue is that if you are doing different activities and you need to change what keyboard, what key that it sends to your iPad, you have to like take the whole thing apart off of the mount in order to do it, which is kind of a bummer. The other ones are you would use an external switch, like the one that I have kind of hanging in my frame here. All right, so I think that pretty much does it. There's other ones out there, and I'd answer questions about them if you have them, but those are my favorite ones. So for choosing a switch, most of the time, you just need a jelly bean twist or a smoothie switch, one of those kind that you have around the class with 3 inches, and you can just start with that. And if your student needs something else, you can work to that. But and I like the 3-inch size. I've found that with the bigger switches, I have students with a really sensitive touch, and they can actually manage sometimes to press the button and not activate it if they get it right on the edge. So the 3-inch one, if you're not using a hand, it's a little better if you're using an alternative placement, not the hands. If you're using it, you know, at the shoulder or somewhere on the face or the head, sometimes a knee. On this slide, there's a resource. So if you click on it, it'll take you to a folder with two spreadsheets that have most of the switches. And there's other ones. There's just a zillion of them. But most of the time, this switch is going to meet your needs, especially if you have it positioned correctly. So if you're not just trying to access it on, you know, right in front of the student and on a tray, you can sometimes, well, you'll need to have some way to mount it. So even just setting the switch perpendicular to the table, and I just used a couple dollars worth of whatever these are, 90-degree half-inch PVC pipe from Home Depot, and I used 3 zip ties, and just having the button this way and using the table it's a lot easier to access because the student can use the table for support or use their armchair rest, and so they don't have to fight to get back off of the button. I think that's the biggest challenge is the student might, you know, get worked up and get on the button, and then they're unable to get off of the button again. So this gives them a little more control if they can, I'm like trying to show you guys on my little screen if you guys can see it, but just support, like you have to pretend to tables there, but just being able to move in one direction forward and backwards is a lot easier. So even just things like that. And you'll want to get input from a professional, but you can always trial and error it. But I recommend if you can get an OT, you know, who's on campus, just to come in and take a look and promise them not to add any more students to their caseload, but just get some input. That usually goes over pretty well. I have a resource here written by an OT called Easy Movements for Using Switches. And you can click on that. I think that, yeah. Some of the links were, I was having trouble, but I'm pretty sure that works. So Easy Movements for Using Switches is a good one. Maybe I'll just try it out. Okay, that one just takes you to the folder, but it's right there. So Easy Movements for Using Switches gives you some tips. So there's your gravity issue. And then some other ideas for places to put switches. Whoops. Okay, and I think I've hyperlinked these. Yeah. So if you click on the images, it'll take you to where you get this. So right here, this is the mount that I have here now, and it's pricey. It's this piece on the bottom that's kind of expensive. We just love Lockline. We don't work for Lockline, but they're great. And then I also included a video here if you would like to try and make your own PVC mount for your jelly bean twist. And you can click on that and it takes you to a YouTube video. All right, so moving along and talking about iPad mounts. So you'll consider where the student is expected to work, and note that mounts are made up of 4 parts generally: a base clamp, an arm, a mounting plate, and an iPad cradle. And I've hyperlinked each of these. The first one that I have here with the knob on it, the top on the top left, is from AbleNet, and I've actually managed to like put together some parts. They're made from this company called Manfrotto, and if you pick one of these arms, you can build your own from parts. And it does save a little bit of money. Or if you happen to have one of these mounts laying around and you just need a new clamp, or there just for some reason it's not working, or maybe you need a cradle for the iPad, I have all of these things hyperlinked for you. When you get a cradle like this, you also need to buy a mounting plate. They're kind of junky. This one works really well, but if you try and adjust it without loosening it, they're made out of plastic, so they don't last really long. But that's been the only mounting plate that I've found that I can reliably purchase, and I get it from AbleNet. So those links are all on this slide, so if you need more. And I also have one on making an iPad stand out of a dry cleaner's coat hanger. So you can do it for free, or you can do deluxe, but you do need to mount the iPad someplace where the student can see it, because, well, if you want them to look at it, I suppose. So iPad mounts. Whoops, too far. All right. So I think I'm going to go straight into showing you how to pair an interface to an iPad. I'm going to stop sharing that. And I'm just going to share my desktop. All right. I did practice this. Screen mirroring. Okay. There's a little bit of a lag. I'm going to try not to look at my computer too much because it messes me up. All right. So if I'm talking and it's not quite matching up, actually I need to look, don't I? Okay. So there's like a really big lag here. So to use an external switch like this one here, I'm going to hook it up to my Bluetooth. So I'm going to turn it on, and I'm just going to, a little tethered here, so I'm going to take that off, and I'm just going to plug it in on the side into one of those jacks. And I'm going to go to my settings on the iPad. On the left, oh, it's lagging. Sorry, guys. Oh boy. Yeah, still not where I'm at. Okay, let me just turn this off. Try one more time. Okay, so at least you see what I'm seeing. So on the left side, you're going to come down to general. And then on the right side, I'm sorry, you're going to, I'm pairing the Bluetooth. You're not going to general. You're going down to Bluetooth. So this is, it's, the iPad sees it as a keyboard. Oops, and I can't click on it there, can I? And I press Bluetooth, but it's lagging. So let's just close it again. Always like in the middle that it pretends that it doesn't work. It does work. So I'm on Bluetooth again. And Bluetooth pops up under devices. I'm just going to touch Bluetooth. It's going to spin, and then it's going to tell me that it's connected. And I only have to do that once. From there, I would recommend getting a blue piece of painter's tape like this one and marking which iPad that you are paired to, especially if you have more than one student using switches, because it's kind of a pain when they get mixed up. So just a little tip. All right, I'm going to hide this again. Come back to the slides. So super simple, right? Pairing an iPad to an interface. Okay, so now we're going to get into the fun stuff. You guys made it. So we're talking about some levels and apps. These levels are based on Linda Burkhardt's steps before step scanning. And just a few changes. Actually, I haven't changed it too much, but you could also think of this as a task analysis for using switches. So yeah, so some children as young as 6 months of age can control cause and effect programs with single switch. So I don't know. I feel there's some, you know, for a student who is physically, I know there's things about screen time, but if you have a student who, you know, where this is something that they can do independently, this can be a really critical skill to start as soon as possible. On this slide, this is basically a summary of the levels, and I've included a link to There's a resources page at the end of these where I have a link to Linda Burkhardt's videos and handouts. But I've sort of summarized them here. So level 1 is cause and effect, and I've featured some apps and activities to go along with the level that go on the iPad. And then in level 2, you start to as soon as you can pick another place to put a switch, you introduce it. But you don't want you want the other switch to do something completely different, like not on the iPad. It needs to control a toy, or one of my favorite things to do is pair it up to a sequence message button, like this little step-by-step. And I'll program in things like I'm finished, or come over here, you know, or maybe I'll do calling attention. So calling attention or ending an activity. And then in step 3, you can have both of the switches interacting with the same game on the iPad. I think I just need to jump in and show you guys. I think I'm running out of time. Let's see. Yeah, I'm doing good. So, oh, I did want to mention this. So steps 1 to 3 are all about laying down groundwork for cause and effect and one-to-one correspondence. So starting the student off by getting the child to look and then engage and then to explore and play. All right. So there are some, I think my favorite switch accessible list out there is compiled by Jane Farrell, and I have her link to her full list at the end of these slides, and I've linked my abridged list, which has the games I've actually used and the games that I like and that kids and adults that I work with seem to like. Here at this bit.ly. So you can go to it, and I'm just going to show you, I have my favorites in the first column. I have the name of the app, and then I have the level. So you can actually sort them quickly. So let's say that you have a level 1 learner. You can hover your mouse over column C, and then choose it to sort the sheet from A to Z. And if you click on that, then it's going to bring all those things to the top. You'll find a lot of these apps will cover more than one level. There's a description. I'm working on hyperlinking these. It's a work in process, so be patient with me. I've also, at the end of this, added whether it's primarily an auditory activity or a visual activity, and I'm still kind of getting the hang of that. Some of these could possibly be more, they could be both, but I thought I'd kind of narrow it down for you a little bit. And then I also threw in a column for age appropriate, so good for older students. You'll find a lot of these switch games are geared towards primary aged kids, students. So it's kind of a challenge to find things for older students, but it can be done. All right, back here. I don't know if I want to start with that. I'm going to come back to this slide. And these ones. So those are going to come at the end. So basically, this is what switch use can look like for a very beginning user. This is Kaysen. I do have parent permission for him. But this is a week into his exploration and learning. He's He's just started with the Switch, and he has some other things like he doesn't like to sit in a wheelchair. He becomes dysregulated, but he does like to lay on his stomach. And they were kind of working on where to put the Loftline switch. So I'm just going to let you guys see it. Sound fireworks. And it has if there's something
Okay, ready? We're gonna take our hands.
Okay, so we'll talk about some apps. Reflector going. So we're going to be referring to this slide. I'm going to take you through the featured apps. So the slide that has levels and description of levels and featured apps and activities. Okay, good. It's moving along. So I'll show you first. The one that Kason was using is called Fireworks, and it's at the end of the first row. I actually found that since I've done the update, it doesn't work in the mode that I want to share. So I'm just going to skip down to another one by the same app developer that's called Popcorn. And it's lagging. Sorry, guys. All right, unshare. Okay, so the thing I want to show you is for these apps, the apps that work with switches require you to set them up to use with switches. So every time you open one of these apps, you're going to go to your settings. So in these settings at the bottom, you'll see modes. The one that we were using with Kason, who's just starting out, is momentary. So it's going to hold the switch to play, release it to stop. And then within another week, I believe they had moved to a timed place where he would press it and it would play for 10 seconds and then it would stop. So I'm going to show you momentary play.
Touch to play.
Which is like this. And so I'm going to switch going here. Oops, I'm in the wrong mode, guys.
Touch to play.
Okay, so I have to make sure that I'm in space and enter. So it's sending space key and enter.
Touch to play.
You can change it so it doesn't prompt you so much, but here's what it looks like. Pretty exciting. And there's a little bit of a delay for you guys, but it did stop on my iPad. So pretty exciting. I'll just show you a different.
Touch to play.
I'll do flowers. So same developer, MarbleSoft. And you don't have to write these down. That abridged list does have all of these apps listed for you, and I'm going through and hyperlinking them. So I'm going to show you a timed play. I'm just going to make it 4 seconds. And close that.
Touch to play.
So now I'm on. Okay, so I hit the switch. So good times. Let me move this out of the way. So, so that's level 1, cause and effect.
Touch to play.
I'm going to show you a couple. So the apps in the first row, the apps in the second row, pretty much everything on this page would fall into that category. I'm going to show you Big Bang Patterns because it's from a different developer and the settings look a little different. So these are from Inclusive Technology, and the settings are in the bottom. Now you have to look on the tabs on the side to go to switch access and turn that on with one switch. And this doesn't have the option to do that momentary play where you hold it down, which is an optional step. If the student's having trouble, making that connection, you might back it up and make sure that you do that step. But you can use these steps sort of interchangeably, fluidly, just however to meet your students' needs. So I'm going to show you, there's a different set of patterns under each of these tabs. So you get hard hitting, curtains, flying shapes, changing shapes. I'll try flying shapes this time. And it tells you to exit. You can tap it or just exit the app by pressing the belly button of your iPad. So, that's a. So, and you can tells you that I'm on 2 of 12, and so you have lots of variation with the same activity. So that is one switch, level 1, cause and effect. One other thing I wanted to show you was the Slides app. So this is just Google Slides, and a friend of mine has adapted. Oops, let's see, what did I do here? Wow. She adapted a unique lesson. I don't know if you guys use unique, but we use it. It's a curriculum that's modified, and a lot of times we'll find that we have to modify even more for students. So this one was in October. It was a lesson, and those were the vocabulary words. And so you can use the switch to turn the page. So one switch, you can have this play automatically. You can have it playing music. There's all kinds of things you can do with slides that I'm not going to get into, but just to kind of think about different ways to vary the activity and have fun with switches on the iPad. So every time I hit the switch, something happens on the page. And that was much cooler on my iPad. The cat spins around. So you get some animation with that. So that goes on. So you guys get the idea there. So that's a free app that you can use and just play with any of your slideshows. All right. So level 2, zooming right along. We're going to keep doing all those same ones that we have up here. We're also going to add a second switch. And this switch is going to go to a voice output or a toy. It has to go to something not on the iPad. And this is just to teach that these 2 buttons do different things. The more different thing that they do, the better. So for this one, I have messages to, well, let's find out.
Hey,
Okay, so I'm going to get attention with this button.
come over here.
So I'm going to get my game going. Big Bang Pictures maybe. Set it up. Switch access. Close. And I have different levels of complexity here, so maybe I'll just use this one. Okay, and one gets attention from maybe the kids in the room, and the other one this button will not do anything until the animation's finished, and there's a little bit of a delay. There it goes. All right, so there's 20. So that's what you do. So you're doing the same stuff, but you just have some other way to communicate. Another one that I've put on here for an activity is to end an activity. So you might set the student up with one of these apps and then let them know, like, when you're done, you can hit this button and we can stop. And so they can play the game, and then when they're done, they can let you know. So that's level 2. Level 3, I'm going to use both switches. I might have this nearby, maybe not, but I'm going to use both of these switches on the iPad. All right, so the app that I'd like to show you now is called Pictello. It's from Assistiveware. And the reason I would spend the money and get Pictello versus books or something else is that you have access to a converter tool that will take any of the books from the Tar Heel Reader. If you're not familiar with the Tar Heel Reader, you're going to love this. But these are super adapted, high interest books. So you can find everything. Oh, I mentioned before that the iPad sees this as a keyboard. So when I put my cursor in the text field, nothing pops up. So I actually have to there's a little keyboard on the end of this, or I can just turn it off and my keyboard will come back. Or you can turn off Bluetooth temporarily by just swiping down. I find it's easiest just to hit the keyboard button. So let's see, let's find, I went and I looked for Lady Gaga for somebody recently, and Panda Gaga, that's not right. Not Panda Gaga. And I found a few videos or a few books, and then I can take these and convert them and play them on my Pictello. Now I didn't do the Lady Gaga one, but I did do one called I Like Dogs, which is not quite as exciting. So you can download books from the Tar Heel Reader, or you can make them from scratch, but I do a lot of borrowing. So you set it up, you queue it up, which means you just hit play.
I like dogs.
And now I can use my switch to read the book, and it's a little bit of a lag. It does work, I swear. So one of the buttons is going to read the text, and the other one's going to turn the page. And my whole thing's, oh, there it goes. It is changing the page. I can actually skip through this slide without reading it. So it's just teaching that these two things do something different on the iPad. But we're not yet step scanning. So that's the Pictello one. And I do have a cheat sheet on this piece of paper, on this slide, where I have the levels and the featured activities. If you find the blue cheat sheet for converting Tar Heel Reader books, then you could do that. I'm going to show you another app called this one is also a level 2 Typebook level 2 activity. And if I put two switches on and play, oh, there's my keyboard. I have to get rid of that again by just tapping on the keyboard button. So one of the buttons is going to activate the old man, and the other one is going to open the door. Okay. Oh, I made him go away by making the man wake up.
Hey Lydia, I have a question about the Disney cat. It's okay to ask that question.
What's up?
I'm really excited about that one, specifically because we've been talking a lot about standards aligned goals. So even if a kid isn't in the fifth grade, how can we read the text that's a fifth grade text in a way that's meaningful to him? So that just was like a great app to be able to. So do you have an example of maybe
On that.
something like how you've done something like that for a kid?
Yeah. I could even spend more time on that. I love Pictello books and I love slides. Those are even more so than the Switch apps. Like I find those are because you can just do so much variation with them. I find kids like they get tired of those cause and effect games, but sometimes they need to continue working on that. And so just being able to control a book or a story or a sequence with a button is really great. So that was and it goes on. Let's see, what time is it? All right, so I'm gonna move along. Actually, the Big Bang Patterns has an option to use two switches, but it's pretty subtle. I don't think that most kids get this one, and I'll show you why, so you can kind of evaluate for yourself what works. But I have two switches on this one. One of them is going to change the slide, and the other one is going to play the animation. So let's see which one's which. To change it to some, there's a little bit of a delay. Some kids might get that, but I don't usually use that one. Let's see. So now that's levels 1 to 3. Those are sometimes the most challenging to think of activities for. Because level 4 is where you start getting into curriculum. So it's where they're starting to scan. There is, you want to offer errorless choices. And by errorless, just having, like maybe on an app like Sounding Board, having 10 different greetings on it, and then going around, and it doesn't matter which one you choose, they're all appropriate, but they're all different. And so the student can start to explore. Let's see. So the partner sometimes has to model some of this. I don't think I'm going to get too much into the teaching of this one until a little bit later. But this is Sounding Board. It's a free communication app. You can program it. You can back it up. It's great. It's by AbleNet. It's on the list. This comes with a few different boards, and you can actually purchase boards, but I find making them isn't such a big deal. So for instance, this actually isn't errorless, but it has some different communication things. You could edit this and just make 6 choices that are all, okay, my switch isn't turned on. So we're gonna go into the settings. This one does remember if you're doing switch scanning. And it does have the option to have audio scanning, which I strongly recommend for you. I don't have to speak to you guys about that. You know the benefits of that. And I can also change the background here. All right. Now, there are no audio cues on the templates right now, so I didn't bother turning that on. But you could potentially put in those audio cues, and then the student would be able to scan like alone, come, stop, no, I don't want, privacy. And that would be like the auditory cue. And then when they choose one of those answers, it would read in a different, it would play a different voice that would say, you know, with a lot more feeling, you know, like, please come back anytime. Let's see which one they have here. Okay, so this one is stepping, and this one is selecting. So I'm going to, and this is again level 4, and I'm going to say in my head when I'm doing this, no, 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 yes.
I don't want that.
I don't want that. That was confusing. So no, no, yes.
Please leave me alone.
Modeling that self-talk is part of the training, and it helps with the one-to-one correspondence that I was talking about earlier. If you can change the cursor to make it larger, there aren't a ton of options in this app. There are apps with more choices, and there's also some settings in the iPad once you get this far where you can really call attention to where the cursor's focus is. So those are some things that you could really get into. I just happen to make it, I have it pink, and it's kind of bold, but not super bold. But if you paired that with an auditory cue, that would be helpful. Or yeah. So level 4, like using errorless choices, you're not panel. You can offer them choices that are more curriculum based. There's some curriculum apps like these literacy and numeracy and science apps. They're kind of pricey. And you're not, at this point, the process of scanning is still very cognitive. And so it's hard. It's just a lot to ask of a kid to do this up front. I would probably wait until they were at level 5 before you began doing these kind of things. But those are, I just featured them because they're available, as well as some pre-made books. This one's for older children. It's called Read to Learn. Just because it's so hard sometimes to find stuff for high school, but this one has life skills, feelings, and it has real pictures and like kind of grown up looking icons, and it is scannable. Let's see if I set it up, which I didn't. But it has settings, and you just have to go into them. Scanning, double switch. Device, Bluetooth, space enter. Okay.
Life skill readers.
Okay, that's working.
Focus on feelings.
It's actually scanning online, but yours is on the share screen. There's a little bit of a delay, so maybe I'll just drop this one. Cool. Stop mirroring for just a moment. So, and I didn't really put anything on level 5 because at this point, level 4 and 5 are sort of blend together. Like I can't pinpoint a moment where switch scanning becomes an automatic task. It just kind of happens. I'm usually not there for that piece. So let me expand my slides. I don't know what happened to my view here. Okay. This was a resource I wanted to share that goes with step 4, because although we're using the focuses on the iPad in this training, you really need to take it also outside of the iPad. And this is one way to do it. So you can see the switch is set up in the similar way that I have mine set. And so ideally, yes would be a head move down. So this could be my select, and no would be a head turn. And then just continuing to model that. So giving choices, and then you can just literally hold your hands out or just wait for them to give you feedback using a head turn or a head nod. There's a blog attached to this slide to help walk you through how to teach that. You can actually begin teaching this skill at level 1. There's no prerequisite. They're going to need a ton of feedback where you tell them exactly what they're communicating to you with their body language. And there's no prerequisite. So yes and no, what that looks like, and how that ties into switch scanning is like another whole thing. So I'm gonna move on past there. And again, this is sort of an overview. I'm breezing through a lot of complicated things right now. So, and I'm going to get your guys' feedback so that I can make this better and more meaningful for you guys or for future people. But in summary, I just wanted to let you guys know that very young kids can practice autonomy with switches, and that it's important that they do this. And when prompting, speak to the activity and not the switch. Oh, I knew I forgot something. There was 3 slides that were out of order, so we're gonna go back to those. Okay, so something that always comes up. What if they don't activate the button? How do we prompt the student? And I have some tips here. 1 is don't panic. 2 is try taking turns with the student, or show them what it is that you're doing. Like actually physically move the switches over and do it. So the student can watch you do it. And another tip is hand-under-hand prompting, so that you're showing the student what you're doing. And there's a link to that for staff. Sometimes classroom staff need very direct instruction and hand-under-hand prompting and what that means. And there's a resource there for you. I find often with older students that they can be tactily defensive or just cautious, and it just, you have to spend a lot of time modeling and building up trust before you can start to prompt a little more, moving to some of these bigger prompts, like moving the switch close so it's touching the skin so they accidentally activate it. Or, and then beyond that, giving a nice long expectant pause, saying something like, oh, I wonder what happens next, or maybe you can make the music go again, and just giving your best pause is enough. And if they don't take that cue, end the activity, try later. There's nothing wrong with that. Because when we prompt hand over hand, the motor movement that we're learning is taking place is interrupted. And the very thing we're trying to prevent with switches, which is learned helplessness, is reinforced. So anytime you move a kid's head or move their hands, or you're reinforcing learned helplessness, and that they're focusing on your touch and not on what it is that you're trying to show them. So in one of the studies I cited, they found like even little kids, babies, toddlers, lost interest, but they liked it later. So just remove the switch, bring it back later, and the task can become interesting again. So that was the one I wanted to follow up with. So this is a slide where I remind you that you can't do this only on the iPad. Learning to use switches and learning to use them autonomously so that you can communicate takes thousands of repetitions. And that's in order to get to that level 5 that I was alluding to, where your focus is on the intent of the movement and not the movement itself. That's from Linda Burkhardt. So your focus is not on left, right, 1, 2. It's on, I want to say go, 1, 2, 3, go. No, 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 yes. So, oh, yikes. I think we're out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really informative. I know I learned a lot. And I'm actually in the chat box. There's different links I just posted. Again, there's a link to a survey. If you can please take the survey. Let us know what you think, if you want her back. And also, we have other webinars coming up. So, watch our YouTube channel. We have BARD coming up, and robotics and quality assessments, LMA and FEA. So thank you so much, Lydia, for all of this information. It will be posted to YouTube, and we will let everybody know when that happens. So thank you so much.
Sounds good. Hey, and I posted up my feedback too. If you guys want to feedback to me, I would also appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.